Aboriginal dreaming stories aren't there as a mythical dreaming, creation for the fun of it. Each story has a lesson behind it, and it's those lessons that are important because they become lifelong. Geology is important to us in that it creates the physical connection through our dreaming to that place, and most of those formations are the rock formations.
It's sort of something that we're born into and something that you don't choose. It chooses you.
As a geologist, we have this concept of deep time and processes. When I look at a landscape, someone might see like amazing views, but I might be thinking about the amount of time that gully took to erode, or what rock type that was and when it might have formed.
I'd like to make sure that the connection between geology, landscape and culture is very clear. And I think it's really important that UNE graduates geoscientists that really have a good understanding of these different relationships. The human element is actually really essential.
So it's quite satisfying to go to an outcrop and then go, well, this rock actually had a very significant role in the evolution of the Earth and life on the planet.
The thing that I love about the earth science and geology in general is that it's time travel. Using rocks, I can go back millions, maybe even billions of years. I do a lot of field work as part of my research and teaching here in Australia and also overseas. And as part of that, we're always in discussions or getting permission from landholders to visit sites. And this can be national parks or farmers or traditional owners. When we go to a site, I think that the problem is sometimes that as a geologist, I look at it with a geologist's eye, but I don't know much about what else is going on at that particular site culturally. In science, especially, the human element is so removed. It's kind of sort of part of the process of how we work. I think it's really important that we expand our knowledge to make sure that we include the geoscientific side, but also the important cultural aspects of the places that we do go for research and teaching. I think it's really important for improving diversity in the geosciences. And I think it's also really important for making sure that there is always a two-way flow of information between these two different perspectives so that we can do our work properly and with all of the different stakeholders in mind. I think we're on the cusp of some really big changes, like the recent handing back of the site at Bullagaranda, and I'd like this project to help catalyse some other big changes. I think of geology like learning a language, and using that language you can read the rocks and they can tell you a story about what our Earth was like a long time ago.
We look for the messages of what's out there, and so we become aware of our environment, because that's important to know when you're walking, that you're walking with respect. Because our law teaches us that everything is equal and we have equal status. We're all here for a purpose. And when our purpose is done, then we pass on and we come back to start a new purpose. Bullagarunda, which means big mountain in Anaiwan language, more widely known by the white fella named Mount Yarrawik. The reason we're here today is for me to tell one of the important stories that was handed down by my elders. It's a story that includes the Moombi mob. So our relationship with the Moombi mob wasn't always peaceful. The story begins with these two young couple who were in love. She was from the Anaiwan tribe, but he wasn't. They spotted the Moombi men coming up the valley, and so they very quickly came up to the campsite and told the elders that the Moombi warriors are coming. What the elders decided to do was allow the men to come into the camp and be friendly with them and try and delay their stay so that the Anaiwan warriors could get back and protect them. They decided that the young people would come down the mountain track to where there are kurrajong trees, and they picked up the kurrajong seeds. And within the pea pod itself, it has these really fine hairs, and these hairs, if you ingest them, irritate your throat. And so they gathered up the kurrajong pods and took them back and put them in the Sweetwater drinking hole. Old fellas gave the Moombi warriors a drink of that water, and it irritated their throat that much that they left and run away. And when the Anaiwan warriors come back, they were telling the Anaiwan warriors of this feat, but they didn't believe them. And so one prominent elder said, yes, this is the truth. And we're going to reward these two young fellas for protecting our camp. You two are going to be together forever and look after this place forever. And so if you see to the left of me, you'll see the man, the young warrior. And to the right of me, you'll see the young girl. And if you look at the middle rock, that's that elder sitting there with them. Rocks are really important to our culture because they help us in direction, they help us with our shelter, but they're also integral to our creation stories because they give us the physical evidence of that story coming to life.
So the rocks at Bullagarunda and Mount Duval are actually granites, and a granite is basically what used to be a huge magma chamber. They're different to the volcanics in that they never erupted. So they cooled very slowly in this huge magma chamber that could be tens of kilometres across.
We live and we, truly, honestly, only live for maintaining culture because it has been in our family so long. To me, it's not a job, it's an obligation. You know, a family legacy. My name's Steve Ahoy. I'm a traditional owner of the Anaiwan Nation. One of my roles is to go and investigate past archaeology surveys and record and update the compactus to where it is. First thing you do when you look at this stuff is grab the ledger, find out information, where they come from. Gyra, Walker, Armidale, so it's Anaiwan Country, Anaiwan people's axes. My mother was studying archaeology, and then she ended up going on to graduate and become the first Anaiwan archaeologist out of this university, the first Aboriginal person to graduate archaeology out of it, and the first Aboriginal female archaeologist to come out of this place. It feels like a family unit out here in the Arc department that I've never been away from. I felt there was a next step was to actually become the archaeologist. So now I've started studying archaeology, but it'll take me a bit longer than the average Joe because, you know, I'm studying it, working 2 jobs and raising 5 kids. So at the end of the day, for me, because I am 6th generation sites officer for the Armidale Anaiwan community, It is not a day in, day out job. It actually is an obligation, a cultural obligation. I'm actually seen in the community as the artefact and sites protector for my nation. So in saying that, I've got a lot of responsibility built up on my shoulders to do this job, not just for my immediate family, but for the broader community as well. So now I'm the Cultural and Heritage Advisor for the university, still doing what I love and what my family's legacy dictates I do. So. Stone to Aboriginal people was one of the most important materials in everyday use. So we're looking at this Salisbury Court axe quarry, and we're trying to investigate the differences in materials being used, what type of geological materials have been used and the purposes of them. Anaiwan is a sub-clan of the Anaiwan Nation, whose traditional lands these are. The closest town we've got is called Rola, but we use the term Rola. Rola to us is meeting place, a place of ceremony, so it's not significant just for the Anaiwan people. We've also got the Gomeroi people, the Thungari, the Biripai and the Gambanga nations that also visited this area and held big combined ceremonies. It was probably 5 nations for this area. When you're going through ceremony, you are learning. When you meet up with people, you learn. So this place was just basically one big giant classroom. Again, the environment dictates every movement that the people make in this landscape. This material is for the axe blanks. We wouldn't use the same material to try and groove and polish the material, so we'd have to go somewhere else in the landscape where there is a appropriate material. So not too far over, there's a set of grinding grooves that we use. So all up there's about 6 axe quarries that's related to this site, and to the grinding grooves there's about 37 different grinding grooves sites itself that's all within a 10-kilometre radius. So that to me shows mass production, many different people sharing and utilising the resources in this country over generations. As an Anaiwan traditional owner on my country in this area, to have sites like this produce tangible evidence that, you know, our oral history is true and it relates to this site, and that it has been passed down for generation after generation, it gives me pride knowing that it's proof that we have been here for this long, we have survived and we're still here.
The Wandsworth volcanics at Salisbury Court represent an ancient super eruption. So eruption's about 253 to 254 million years, and it's part of a sequence of eruptions that happened over about 4 million year period that covered the whole of New England. So the amount of material that came out in the eruptions was vast. Estimates sort of suggest greater than 150,000 cubic kilometres of rock, and it was sprayed out in these sort of dense hot flows, as well as material that we call ash that went all the way up into the atmosphere and spread all over the east coast of Australia. We can see the remnants up around Townsville and Western Queensland and south of Sydney. When you have this material coming out at 700 degrees or something like that in these hot clouds, and you have all these fragments of rocks together, eventually it gets to a point where it stalls, and all this material, you have fragments of volcanic rock and minerals, and they solidify together and anneal to each other and make a really dense, quite strong rock, which actually turns out to be very good for making something like an axe head. So it'd be one of the sort of classic New England rock. We have these products that represent the volcanic material is ejected, and we also have the remnant magma chambers present as granites, and they're sort of our granite country that's classic for the New England. So we have a mix of both of these types. Minerals in rocks are a great recorder of processes that have gone on, and we're looking at something that's static, but it actually represents a dynamic history. So it's about sort of putting together the puzzle. That's something that I quite enjoy, is looking through those little snapshots on the small scale and putting it together into a bigger scale picture to try and unravel their history.
I'm going to be telling the story of the Anaiwan brothers, or as we just call them, the brothers. It's a story that involves two mountains. To the north we have Big Brother. To the south of our camp, which is Armidale City, we have Little Brother. They were young boys, and they used to fight about who's the fastest runner, who can throw the spear, the boomerang the best, who got up early, had the best breakfast. Every little thing they used to fight over. And so the old men got them around the campfire that night and sat them down and said, listen, we have chosen you two brothers to start your new journey from being boys into manhood. But before we do that, we need you to stop fighting. We want you to promise that in the morning there'll be no more fighting. And they were eager, and they said, yes, yes, we promise, we promise. And the old men stopped them. And the old man said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Be careful that you make sure that when you promise us that you aren't going to fight, that you keep that promise. And then the two brothers looked at each other and looked at the old man and said, yes, yes, yes. We promise you that we won't fight in the morning. And the old men sent them to bed. In the morning, straight away, they started fighting over breakfast. And the old men saw this straight and said, come over here, you two brothers, sit down. You've broke your promise. So they said to the oldest brother, you will go to the north side of our camp, and there you will sit for all time. From there, you'll be near our camp, you'll see our camp, but because you broke your promise, you'll be kept apart from our camp. And they said to the youngest brother, you will go to the south side of our camp, and there you will sit. Because you broke your promise, you'll be kept away from our camp. You two brothers will always see each other, you'll be near each other, but because you broke your promise to us, you will be kept apart. Now, my grandfather was a philosopher of sorts, or he thought he was, but he put a saying to that. We can live in a place we love, with people we love, and we may walk. Trouble is, we may walk in all different directions. We can be like those two Anaiwan brothers, where we'll always be together, see each other, but because of our differences, we'll always be kept apart. Or as one community, we can become the kangaroo, and as one community, always progress forward.
Little Brother is interesting in that it's not like all the other flows in the New England. So it was actually feeding these lava flows. It's the conduit of the magma that was coming up, and then the lava was flowing out away from it. You know, because it's a vertical pipe, it weathers in a conical fashion. So it's very distinct in the landscape because of that conical shape. Little Brother is quite young, it's about 19 million years is when that volcanic activity was occurring, whereas Big Brother, that was around 250 million years, so there's quite a time gap between the two, and they're completely different types of magma and different things were going on. The age difference of these two, the Little Brother is really quite young, it's about 19 million years, whereas Big Brother is really old, it's 251 million years, so they really are a big brother and a little brother. This interesting outcrop that we're standing at here is actually a rock called basalt. Basalt is actually a volcanic rock. It erupted out of a volcano as a lava flow, And these are the cooling cracks as it contracted and cooled. Generally, the cracking starts from a cooling surface, either at the top or at the bottom. The basalt lava is formed by partial melting of the mantle. The mantle is partially molten and magma starts to move up. And if you're lucky, it'll actually drag up pieces of the mantle with it. We can't get to the mantle. It's far too deep and too hostile. The crust is actually sort of floating on top of it. And so, but this is one of the ways we can actually study the mantle, is by these fragments that the volcano has brought up for us from great depths. I couldn't think of a better job. You're getting paid to be outdoors, and and you also learn about this planet and how it evolved and why the landscapes are the way they are. If you just got a bunch of rocks in a lab, there's a hell of a lot you can do with them, but you might not understand the full context of what's going on, and you have a hell of a lot of deeper level of learning by seeing the rocks in their natural environment.
The first question is always why? Why is that there? And what might they be telling us? And so as a geologist, I think that's our ultimate question, is why is the landform in that way? And the next thing is usually, let's go and have a look, which is the fun part. Some of the fondest memories are actually when we're confused, and we'll spend a long time discussing how the rocks might have got there, and having some debate. And in the end, it might be something we think about for months later, and that drives that inquiry.
Being down in the collections, it really is quite amazing. You're walking through these aisles and you're looking at all these curated rock specimens that are specifically tied to a thesis from a specific period of time, and it really makes you think about the past work. Back in 1939, when the university started, geology was one of the first courses offered, and the collection has begun since then. And it's still going today. We're still adding material to it. It's not only research collections, but it's also teaching collections. We've got vast amounts of teaching material from all over the globe. It's probably one of the largest ones in Australia for a university. And we're just sort of building on this legacy that the early workers here from going back to 1939, we're just sort of keeping it going and keeping it curated, and we're still very active.
When we were young, boys were around 8, 9 year old, the elders used to bring us out from Armidale, and they used to search us, make sure we had no lollies, matches or anything like that. And then they'd just say, see you later. And then we'd have to survive out here. It could be 2 or 3 nights, sometimes 5, 6 nights. But before they leave, they used to tell us the creation story of Danger's Falls, and it involved the old fellows referred to as the Moombi men. And according to them, they were big men, and they were giant men. And they used to come, their favourite path was coming through Danger's Falls here and crossing the river in raiding parties. It was going to end up into a big fight. And so the Anaiwan elder at the time, the most senior elder, thought about that, and he came up with this scheme to say, my greatest warrior will fight their greatest warrior. And the agreement was that they would fight to the death. When the elder came back and told our warriors this is what's going to happen, and he chose one fella to do the fighting, and that fella was really scared. He said, me fighting one big fella over there? No. He said, yeah, but this is how you're going to do it. It's not about fighting that way or with our tools, it's about using your head. He said, when that giant fella comes, you hit him in the toe with your stone axe. And then when he grabs his foot, you hit him in the other toe. And then when he bends down and fall over, then you cut his head off. And the first opportunity that the Anaiwan warrior got to hit the giant Moombi warrior on the toe, he did it. And that warrior jumped And when he landed, the Anaiwan warrior then hit him on the other toe. The fight was going down the creek. Every time that Moomba warrior jumped, and when he landed, he left potholes. And when he bent down to grab his toe, the Anaiwan warrior jumped up and cut off his head. As he was cutting off his head, the Moomba warrior stood up real fast, and as he did, the force of him standing up sent his head way up into the air. And when his head landed again, it made that big indent, which is at the bottom of the falls, but it didn't stop there. And the head started rolling down the creek, and as it went, it created the gorge behind it. The warrior who was successful in the fight, he was made the guardian of this place, and he sits in a physical, spiritual form on the other side of the gorge, looking back. This area is important for us, as young folk, to teach us to use our mind to think about how do we survive in this world. If we haven't got the resources, well, let's find out what resources we have and how best we can utilise those.
The gorge country is, a classic feature in the New England. It's got this lovely escarpment and these deep gorges. It's actually a feature that's developed in the past 100 million years. Actually, the crust is rising and the river's incised down into the crust and eroded away, forming these steep gorges. We know that it's continuing into more modern times because we can see that these 19 million year old basalts are actually cut in size. So it's quite it's still occurring today. You weave all these things together and build a story to show how the rocks evolved, or what processes might have taken place and how the earth evolved in that way. We find these little bits of evidence in the rock and we study them and figure out what they mean, and then we start to build a story.
We live in the landscape. We believe in modern term is reincarnation. So every time one of us passes away, we actually come back as a physical representation in the landscape. So this rock is not just a rock to me. We put a human element on it, and we actually describe the rock as our grandfather or our grandmother. In our culture, we put those human elements to these physical features in the landscape, so it then encourages the respect. It encourages the sustainable way of living.
So it's about sort of putting together the puzzle all the way along the way, and that's one of the great joys, is that problem solving and trying to sort of see through years and years of history to try and capture one time period or one process along the way.
My vision for the future of geoscience is that it's more than just what we can take from the earth, that it's a discipline that teaches people how complex and amazing the earth is, how old it is, and how much it's changed over billions of years.
In terms of our life cycle, it isn't just human life here. Every living organism has got a purpose on this within their life cycle. Rocks and that are similar. These rocks were up there at one stage. Now they're down here. But one of the purposes of coming from up there down here is to form rock shelters. From here we've got the river down below us, and that river where the boulders are smaller and smaller. So eventually they hit that sand and they're done. Now who knows what that is going to come back at us, right? And that's why you show respect. And so I'll get used to say hello to him in our language, which is Dangana, and all you need to do is just Dangana, sing it. Dangana. Yes, and so that's to let him know that we're here, and we're acknowledging that we know that he's here, and so we can feel safe, and he's here to ensure that while we're here, we do the right thing on country.